starting into our presentation today, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what our first 3 years of using MAP data were like. And just as it is for many people who are new to MAP, we went through all the growing pains with our teachers and educational staff, our administrators. What do RIT scores really mean? Is there a grade level proficiency? And so there was a lot of attention in the beginning to the normative data charts and kind of that 50th percentile and where kids were, and a lot of talk about kids were below grade level or at grade level or above grade level, and really trying to understand how to use the data and how to talk with students and parents about it. Then as we got more used to our usage with MAP, we also started looking at that projected and expected growth that we see with students, and what does that really mean, and how does that growth projections impact students. So what we did was really came up with a set of terms, or kind of our district definitions, and so we had a common language about how we were going to talk about RIT scores and percentile ranks and so on. And so as many of you know, RIT scores can be, the acronym Ready for Instruction Today can be used. And we've really stressed with our teachers that those RIT scores link them into the learning continuum and the skills that students are ready to learn, skills that they should be more confident with, skills that would be upcoming for them, but that a RIT score isn't anchored to a grade level, or we could hear sometimes teachers or students saying, oh, that's a 5th grade RIT score, or that's a 2nd grade RIT score. And we really wanted to get away from that anchoring of a RIT score to a specific grade level, but that RIT scores really link us into the learning continuum for the skills. Once we look at that, those RIT scores really are about a range of skills, and that sometimes when we look in the learning continuum, we may see a specific skill that extends over the course of 2 or 3 10-point bands of RIT scores, and so that it's the learning continuum is not just a checklist to be used to check off skills that are taught, but really to think about how those skills are used and spiraled in through curriculum and taught over a span of growing skills and knowledge. RIT scores also tell us about the need for differentiation within our classes, especially as we look at the standard deviation with our mean scores in classes, but that the RIT scores and how those students fall into different RIT bands really help us to be able to identify what kind of differentiation we may want to do, and again that it can be very useful in reflective review of our teaching practices and what's working with our students and what's not working, and where we may need to augment some of those teaching practices. As we had more of an understanding of RIT scores, we really in Southfield Public Schools started to understand and appreciate the importance of percentile rank, and that percentile rank really is a comparison of students within a grade and age-leveled peers to a national norm. And that students who are in 3rd grade or are in 5th grade, that percentile rank can really be used to help show when we are actually closing achievement gaps. Not just that students are raising their RIT score throughout the year, but then the question always comes up is how much is enough of an increase in a RIT score? And so that percentile rank within a grade really allowed us to begin to talk about closing achievement gaps and what kind of RIT score gain was enough to really be closing achievement gaps. We also talked a lot in our district about the perception by many that that 50th percentile might mean that it's a grade level proficiency. But we in our district have really moved away from that understanding and really worked with our teachers to understand that that 50th percentile is where students are demonstrating across the country their understanding and knowledge is. But it's not necessarily it's not a proficiency mark in that the 50th percentile will correlate to all skills attained or required for the standards at that level, nor would a 50th percentile proficiency necessarily correlate to a proficient rating on our state assessment for accountability. And so the analogy that I often give teachers and administrators when we look at this, because a lot of times when we talk about RIT scores and percentiles, you'll hear people talk about, oh, that student is performing like a typical second grader as they look at the norm charter, or that student is 2 grade levels behind. And while the RIT score can help link us to standards that might be taught in another grade, and they can help link us to curricular resources that might be present in another grade level, we really need to honor that the student is in the grade level in which they sit. So while they may have an achievement gap that places them in the 10th percentile for a 5th grader, to say that that student is operating, they may have a reading ability similar to what a second grader is, but that term can be often misused, or can, especially if it's used with students, parents can become discouraging to them. And so the analogy that we use is kind of like a sports analogy when you think about teams in a league. And when you have teams in the Big Ten or the SEC or the ACC, those teams that are in that league belong in that league, whether their season record is 13-0 at the end of the season or they're 0-13. They still belong in that league. And so their improvement and achievement is based among their peers within that league. And so we really want to work with our students in talking about how if that is a sitting 5th grader, their achievement level may be below the 50th percentile, and we need to move them up. But we really are careful about not talking about your below grade level or you're performing like a typical student in another grade, because we want to have those students feel that they are a true member and peer in their classroom, and that we just need to move their standing to be closer to the average student in that classroom. And then the last thing on this screen is here at the Career and College Readiness, or CCR path of 70th percentile. And the next slide we'll really talk about how we came to that understanding. The one sheet comparative data sheet is an NWEA resource that's available on the website. And this was a real game changer for us. When we began to look at this, we could see that when we saw students all ranked here in mathematics, and again, this chart is available for reading, for language usage, for science. I just clipped out a math piece here for you so that we could look at it closely. It shows us where in the fall the 50th percentile would be for all the different grade levels. And as we shared this with staff, we began to see that when we look at a half a standard deviation increase, so here at 5th grade from 211 in the fall to 219, that correlates in a change in percentile rank from 50 points or 50th percentile to the 69th percentile. And so just a 7-point change in RIT achievement, which isn't even, that's all within those same skills within a 10-point RIT band. But being able to demonstrate proficiency at those skills in that band can really change the student's percentile level as they are tested. And then as we looked across the top, we could see that through linking studies that NWEA has done with Smarter Balanced Assessments and the ACT, we begin to see a trajectory of scores that students would have to achieve over successive years to be on a career and college readiness path to maybe score 22 on the ACT or a 24 on the ACT, and that those, while they're associated with certain RIT scores, it's much easier for people to think about that in terms of a percentile rank, because the percentile ranks stay a little bit more steady. So whereas if you're thinking about a RIT score for each grade level, that changes as you move from fall to winter to spring, and then each grade successively increases. But if you're thinking about, I'm aiming for a career and college readiness percentile that's linked to a study, then it's a more focused goal on that certain number. So we can see that the percentile ranks are anywhere from the 52nd percentile up to the 72nd for smarter or balanced, and then down here to the 61st to the 78th percentile for various ACT scores. And this is really where we became grounded in this understanding about what a career and college readiness path would be like for our students, that it's actually above the 50th percentile and falls into these greater percentile ranks. And so just for clarity, as we began to think about this, we chose kind of that midpoint of the 70th percentile, like the midpoint between the 63rd and 86th, is the number that we were really going to have to, that we really wanted to focus on with our students. So we have another point. He was paying good attention to that. So between the 61st and the 83rd percentile is where the career and college readiness linking studies are. So what does this look like as we look at individual student data? This is a resource that I created for our district to use from the NWEA normative data tables. And if you watch in the chat link, there will be a link that you can use to access all of these tables. We have them created for kindergarten through 10th or 11th grade, and all of the subjects, math, reading, language usage, and science. So if we look at this example, and Bobby is our fictitious student here. Oops, I'm trying to grab my pointer. There we go. If Bobby starts the year of 5th grade with a 200 RIT score, Bobby's in that 21st to 22nd percentile, so right in this range. Now we know that typical growth for a 5th grader in math is about 10 points in a year. So if Bobby grows 6 of those 10 points by the winter, Bobby will have a 206 RIT score and now be in the 23rd to 24th percentile. If Bobby reaches his goal and grows those additional 4 points at the end of the school year, Bobby will be in the 24th to 25th school year. Now we want to celebrate Bobby in this case because in fact Bobby did grow his projected typical year growth, which is a good thing, but we can see that this has not significantly closed the achievement gap for Bobby. Secondarily, if we decide that we want to set some stretch goals for Bobby, and so he's starting again at this 200 range, and we know that typical 5th graders in math grow about 10 points a year, so we're going to set a stretch goal for Bobby. And we use that as a stretch goal of about 1.5 times the typical goal for a growth target, so that will be 15 points over the course of the year. So if Bobby grows 8 of those points by the mid-year, we can see that Bobby's percentile grows to the 27th or 28th percentile. And then if Bobby meets those remaining 7 points, Bobby will at the end of 5th grade be in the 34th to 35th percentile at the end of the year. So now Bobby has changed his percentile rank over 10 percentile rank points. And that becomes a more significant closing of the achievement gap for students. We've looked at this, and I will be talking about this in upcoming Fusion webinar, or not webinar, I'm sorry, session in June. But how this looks vertically for students, if you've got a student maybe who's new to your district in the 4th or 5th grade, and they're coming in with some skill deficits and an achievement gap, how you can vertically plan for a student to set reasonable goals for that student each year, but showing the student and the parent how you can continue to grow that student with those stretch goals to a career and college readiness track over the course of several years in your district. False, that's right. Some people misunderstand this, but that yearly projected growth shows what a typical student grows during a year, but will not automatically or is not enough to grow that student to the growth, the national norm. So in our district, we came up with, when we started talking about these stretch goals, we came up with this idea of what we call our CMK goals. And CMK stands for Catch Up, Move Up, and Keep Up Growth. So catch-up growth is taking students who have an achievement gap and are below the 50th percentile, and it's setting specific goals using the learning continuum, using all kinds of resources and interventions that we might have, and how we begin moving those students from whatever percentile rank they're at up towards that 50th percent. So we want to catch them up. Then for students who are in that 50th percentile or slightly above, we want to keep moving them up towards the 70th percentile. And so those are the move-up goals. And so we want to be very intentional about continuing to create goals, setting learning paths and so on for those kinds of students who can keep moving up to that 70th percentile for career and college readiness. And then we have our keep-up growth. So our students who have reached that 70th percentile, we don't want them to just think, okay, we're good, we can just hang back and coast on through school. But we want to continue to set goals for them and help them continue to move their percentile growth up towards the 90th percentile. Now we know everybody's not going to get to the 90th percentile. It's not how the normative curve works and how data distributes, but it is a good goal for all of those students to participate in that goal setting process. Many of our students in the district keep a data notebook where they are setting their own goals, they're tracking their own goals, and they can actually talk to you about what the goal that's been set for them and what they're doing to move towards that goal. We've found that what we call the triangle of partnership for our CMK goals between our teacher, which is really the front line for the administrator, the school, and the district, students and parents, and that having all three of these parts can be very important in setting goals and having everybody to buy into those goals. One of our first years in MAP, I was looking over reports after our winter test cycle and noticed that we had one teacher who 100% of her students had met their winter mathematics growth goal. And so I was really interested to see what was going on in that classroom, how the students were engaging, and so I went and watched a math lesson and talked with students and so on. And I wish I had had a camera and a microphone running at that time, because one young man that I was talking to, and this is a 5th grader, he as I was asking questions to the class, he kept raising his hand, and so I called on him and I said, what did he want to share? And he said, well, I am making the hypothesis, and that was his word, that I will reach my spring growth goal. I thought, okay, he knows what he's talking about here. And I said, why are you making that hypothesis? And he said, well, my teacher showed me the skills that I needed to be working on to help my math score go up. And I knew, based on what he was talking about, the documents they were using in class, the teacher had pulled out some of the skills that he needed to work on from the learning continuum. And he said, and then I noticed I was doing this at home, an online resource that we use for students. He said, I noticed when I was doing my homework with that at night that I was practicing the things that she highlighted for me as the things that MAP said I needed to be working on. And he said, he kind of acted surprised, and I asked him, I said, why you seem surprised by that? He said, I thought homework was just for extra work. He said, I didn't realize it was to help me reach my goals. And so I congratulated him on his efforts and his understanding of that and so on. But it really was an illuminator for me that many times students don't always make the connections for that we might think are naturally there, that what we're asking them to do in their everyday work is actually linked to the work they need to do to increase their achievement level. And so we continue to work on having goal meetings with our students and to have explicit conversations with students about the actual goals and that they're setting and the types of things that they're going to do to achieve those goals. It is really the percentile rank that can show educators, that can show students and parents how, regardless of how their RIT score is changing, because we always want to hope that their RIT score is going up, but how much up is enough for them? And so that's where this percentile rank becomes really important for students and parents and the educators to focus in on, to think about how is that achievement gap being closed. So now I want to take you into the view that we use to kind of look at this on a classroom basis. So we would navigate to the Achievement Status and Growth Quadrant Report. So you would find that under the MAP reports and then the Summary with Quadrant Report link. And before we click into that link, we're just going to review, and this is Southfield's definition of goals. You could set your goals or your bands of how you wanted to do this. There's any number of ways you can do it. But when we talk about catch-up goals, we say catch-up goals are set to help lower achieving students move their RIT scores and percentile rank closer to doing great. That's right. It's the 50th percentile and national norm for the catch-up goals. All right, move-up goals are set for students that are achieving in which percentile range? We now have about 981 people with us, and we're just about ready to close this poll. And that's right. Our move-up goals are for those students who have made it to the 50th percentile, and we're going up to the 80th percentile. And then lastly, keep-up goals are set for students that are achieving above the I'm going to pop the results out here. That's right, the 70th percentile. So looking at a classroom view of the Achievement Status and Growth Report, or the ASG report, on that the quadrant report, you can see I've, let me get my clicker there. Okay, so I changed the vertical bar for the achievement percentile to the 70th percentile because that's where we're saying is the career and college readiness. And then I've left the conditional growth percentile at the 50th because we know that students who are growing above the 50th percentile in conditional growth are actually increasing their achievement percentile. So they're closing those achievement gaps. Students who are below that are not increasing their achievement percentile. And then I've put these vertical dividers on, so our catch-up goals go from the 0 to the 50th percentile. Our move-up goals are from the 50th to the 70th, and then our keep-up goals are beyond that. And so in looking at this just from an overall classroom view, and if you know you viewed this online, as you hover over these specific things, the student will pop out with some information about them. You can see, if I'm an elementary school teacher, I can see all of my students projected on this view. I can use these toggle buttons over here to just view one subject at a time, but it really gives me a classroom snapshot of what it looks like, what kind of goals I may want to be thinking about and setting with my students as an overall unit with class. The other thing that we talk about in our district is these students up here. And we want to talk about the students who are achieving those catch-up, move-up, or keep-up goals. And we really want to analyze what's going right for them. What's working for those students? Maybe we can see that through just participation rates in different programs. But it really becomes important to talk to students and kind of interview students to see what is it that they liked about specific kinds of interventions, or what was it about setting goals that worked for them. And sometimes it can even help if you've created the atmosphere and environment in your classroom or your school, is to have students talk peer-to-peer with one another about how they set goals, how they're reaching their goals. Because sometimes it can be more motivating to hear from my fellow 5th grader or my fellow 8th grader what they did to achieve some of their goals that might motivate me more than hearing my teacher or my principal talk about it. So we really kind of look at this to get an overall view of how classroom goals might be set. Next, we look at, when we think about setting those individual student goals, NWEA has developed this new student profile report that we are absolutely loving in our district, because it gives this great historical view of where a student scored, and we can, you can see the ups and downs that are sometimes experienced with that summer slide. You see the national norm presented. You see your district mean presented. There's just so much information presented on this dashboard view that it really becomes a great tool to work with students and to actually have up on a computer screen as you're having a goal-setting conference. And my favorite part of this, I think, is this the goal-setting module here. And so if you were looking at this report on your screen, it's over here with growth goals. And that pops up this additional screen. So gives you the opportunity to see how the typical growth goals might be set for a student, but then you can actually give a goal score and what you want that growth to be. And then over here you can see how the typical and your stretch goal may change the trajectory of that line. And this seems to really, educators are loving this and are really excited about how this looks as they see this. And part of what I'm going to be presenting at Fusion in June will be talking about how we've used this with our students and teachers in class, and how just how everybody's kind of the outcome of that, and what we have to share about that growth. So I'm going to take just a second.